All right, this is the second video in this OOP series where we've created objects, we've set them, we get them, we do them, construct them, did all the methods. Now what I want to do is just begin to understand how we can potentially use these objects. Past few weeks, videos, we really just talked about creating, well, actually, first of all, creating classes, creating methods within those classes, and then creating the objects based upon those classes. I want to begin to use those methods. So again, we're going to go and think about our little environment called GURPS. Now, before we use the objects, we're going to say that we're going to allow, in our little game here, we're going to allow Darcy Richards and Alice November the ability to change or actually use their game points, right? So they've acquired game points, and we can see, and we saw in the previous video, they were assigned values of their strength, intelligence, dexterity, and health. Now they have these game points, and they're going to want to adjust their character based upon their own belief. Maybe Darcy Richards wants a character that's a little bit more intelligent. Maybe Alice November wants a character that's maybe has more dexterity. We just want to change the values a little bit. And we're going to be a little sneaky here. So I'm looking here at Darcy Richards. She has 50 starting points, right? And what I'm going to do is uncomment things. And we're going to say Darcy wants to increase the strength of her character by 1 point, right? Not going to be greedy here. So Darcy wants to increase her strength by 1 point. So her strength is going to go from, I think, base 10. I can look back here. Her strength is going to go from 10 to 11. That's going to cost her points, right? So we're not going to worry about Alice right now. Let's see what happens when we just increase Darcy's strength by 1 point. Okay, let's see. Darcy Richards starts with 50 points. Strength is 10. Now, after the change, we can see that her points dropped to 40 because she used 10 of her game points to increase her strength by 1. Her strength is now 11. That changed. If we look down here, it changed the damage. It changed anything down here that was associated with her strength. Let's say she wants to increase her intelligence. Okay, we'll run the program again. And we'll say Darcy Richards, increase intelligence. And you know what? This one will only do 1 also. Let's see what happens. So she starts with 50 points. Oh, intelligence costs 20. So strength costs 10, intelligence costs 20. She's now down to only 20 game points. But you can see that her strength has gone up by 1 to 11. Her intelligence has gone up by 1 to 21. Let's take a look at Alice November. Just getting rid of the comments. She has a base value here. She's going to decrease her strength by 1, right? So she's saying, my character might be too strong. I only have 25 game points. I need to use those game points someplace else. Not going to worry about this down here yet. So let's run this. And again, we're only worried about Alice November right now. Let's see. Alice starts with 25 points starting the game. There's her basic information. She sold one of her strengths, which got her 10 game points back. So she went from 25 to 35. And you can see that her strength went down to 9, and all her secondary characteristics had to be changed. The user is clueless how that's being done. That's that obfuscation. Let's say now, well, she has some points. She wants to increase her intelligence. Well, we're going to increase it by 1. We remember intelligence costs us 20, so we only have 35. 2 would cost us 40. You know what? Let's cheat a little bit. Let's try to increase it by 2, right? So this is going to cost her 40, but she only has 35 points. Let's see what happens. Now the program still ran, right? Because I put code in there to say no, right? You could only take it to the point where you would begin to run out of points. So it just so happened that, yeah, she started at 35. She was able to sell one. She was able to buy 1 intelligent point. That took her down to 15. So 35 minus 20 is 15. Don't worry about GURPS. But that increased her intelligence. But when she tried to get that second intelligent point, she just didn't have enough, right? So maybe she would have to sell. All right, now let's use these objects. Very rudimentary. You can imagine in a game like this, or even any kind of video game, or you're shopping on Amazon.com. If you're changing the value of one thing, it's going to change the value in many different areas. So if I buy a book on Amazon.com, it's going to change how much I have to spend, how much tax I have, what credit cards I could potentially use, if I have gift cards. So you can see this butterfly effect. So we have a class called combat, right? And right now, it's not where it should be. There's different types of combat. And this first combat, we're just going to call it melee. Hand-to-hand, and we're going to keep it real simple, right? In this hand-to-hand combat, basically we would create some kind of event. We have a constructor that's going to create an event. 2 characters get into a ring and they battle it out. They duke it out, or whatever, MMA style. So that's the constructor of this melee event. And now this is interesting right here. This get character full name, you'll notice something. I'm not using self here, and that's important. That's going to be real important in a second. Remember what self is. Self is saying you are working on the object that it was currently sent. But in a melee, let me scroll this down a little bit. In a melee, we're going to send it 2 objects. We're going to send it the object for opponent 1, and we're going to send it the object for opponent 2. So we're not really, what opponent are we working with fundamentally, right? With this who would win, that's the name of this method here, is who would win, we basically send it two separate objects, opponent 1 and opponent 2. Those are just, again, those are variables. So what would happen is, print, you are comparing opponent 1, get full name. Look at this line right here. How would get character full name know the opponent if we sent it self, right? Self is talking about the melee, not about the objects being used. In this class, when we refer to self, we are referring to the melee object, whatever we should be creating. I'm not sending it melee objects. I'm sending it character objects. So that is why under here, this get character full name generic's just a parameter. I'm saying in this line here, I'm sending the opponent one's object. And the exact same thing here. I'm sending the opponent's object for opponent 2 up there. So this particular get character full name, we're not getting the full name of the melee. No, we're getting the full name of the information of the objects that we're sending it. In some situations, I'm sending an opponent 1, and in other objects, I'm sending an opponent 2. So let's go back to main. And we finally get to these last 2 lines. All right, the first line here, first event, that's the object. We're going to create a melee object called first event, and all we need to do is pass it a title, and we're going to call it first event. No big deal there. But then we're going to use the method for first event under the melee class called who would win. So remember, there's a method inside the melee class called who would win. That's a method that is associated with the first event, that object that was just immediately created. And we are going to send it to two objects that we created above it. So we're going to send it Darcy Richards and Alice November. This is the heart of what I have been talking about the using of objects. All the other videos, all the other things were basically the creation of the class, creation of the methods for the classes, and then creating the objects from those classes and using methods on those objects. Now what we're doing is we're actually using objects. You keep using my analogy of Amazon.com. I create a shopping cart object. I have a book object. I have a an item object, and we're putting these separate, book item and item object inside our shopping cart object, and then we go to pay it, and then we're going to use our credit card object. You see where every element, every piece, it has some kind of object associated with it. This is a very rudimentary combat. If I go to the actual logic of the combat, it basically says, what do we got here? If opponent 1's strength is greater than opponent 2, then opponent 1 wins. If the opponent 1's strength is less than, I'm looking right here. If the opponent 1's strength is less than opponent 2, then opponent 2 won. And then finally, if they're equal, then we'll call it a tie, right? So let's run this. First of all, let's take a look. Let's see, Darcy Richards starts with a strength of 10, and she increased her strength to 11. It did cost her some. And Alice started with a strength of 10, where are we? And she decremented it, right? So I think Darcy Richards has a strength of 11, and Alice November, strength of 9. I think I know who's going to win. But here's the combat. You are comparing Darcy Richards to Alice November. Darcy Richards would win over Alice November. Now, very rudimentary. I understand that, almost to the point that it's being boring, but you can imagine how things start getting complicated. Let's say in this particular environment, again, don't worry about GURPS. What if you have armor? What if you have different weapons? What if it's involving some kind of intelligence? What if you're dealing with a spy that knows how to unlock locks, pick locks? So we may not be doing combat, but we can be doing actions. Combat just happens to be a given action. We can say, okay, we have the object called a lock, and we have Darcy Richards, who has a certain intelligence level, and maybe and there's other things. She can go out there and learn other things. I'm not going to worry about GURPS here, but she can go out and learn other things, and one of the things that she can potentially learn is lock picking, and at a certain level, she can pick a lock. So you can see where the lock is an object, Darcy's an object, her abilities to do things are characteristics, and those characteristics work upon the different objects. In this particular example, we had a little bit of a melee, and we just said who's stronger. Maybe they did an arm wrestling or something. Whoever had the stronger arm won. But more importantly, don't worry about GURPS. Most importantly was we had two objects. We had, I forget their names, sorry, Darcy Richards, and we had Alice November, and we had them interacting with each other. What about when we have situations where we have different objects? Maybe we have a suit of armor object, and Darcy Richards wears that suit of armor. Maybe that affects her combat skills or her strength or things like that. So let's wrap things up. A lot of stuff in OOP, and we have literally just scratched the surface. This is how programming works. We want to treat things as objects. Now, if we want to expand it, I can create a whole bunch of characters. Maybe I can take objects and I can put them in a list, or I can take objects and put them into some kind of dictionary, and I can have, we don't use arrays in Python, I know that, but we can have non-player characters interacting with character-based players. So all we're doing is creating elements. We're creating these objects based upon the classes, and then the objects interact with other objects. Walking into a room is an object. The furniture in the room is an object. The lock to the door, the lock, everything, those are all objects. And we can see now with this rudimentary explanation how they interact with each other. So with that being said, let's go and learn something.